Happy Monday. So, guess what? I apparently didn't turn on my mic when I did the 30-minute notes video on ethics and morality, and so I get the pleasure of doing it all again. How exciting! So, here we are, doing it again. Ethics and morality, take 2. We live in a nightmare. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, so... Oh, man. Okay, here we go. 30 minutes. All right, strap in. This next bit that we're talking about is about how do you know what right is from wrong. So I'm starting on slide 10 here in the philosophy and film slideshow for you, and ultimately we are going to be watching the movie The Dark Knight, because The Dark Knight is a good example of one of these particular kinds of morality. I'm not going to say that the Joker has a sense of morality, except for kind of randomness, even though he makes incredibly complicated plans, but we're talking about the Batman. So before we move any further, and I'm going to trust that you're going to pause this video and noodle about it, is how do you know what is right and what is wrong? What is your litmus test, so to speak, when deciding whether some actions are moral or immoral? How do you know? Okay, pause the video and think. Okay, so you paused the video. I believe that you did, every one of you. And now we're going to talk about it. So people's ethics and morality come from a lot of different places. Sometimes it's just what you feel is right or wrong. Sometimes you trust in society at large. If you are a religious person, you might trust that there is a religious book of some sort that gives you the rules that you should follow. So, it says XYZ in the Bible, or it says XYZ in the Quran, or it says XYZ in insert holy text here. And that is all fine. This unit is not meant to convince you of one thing or the other, just to kind of give you an intro into two of the major kinds of ethics and morality that there are. So if you are a religious person, your views probably line up more with what we would call deontology. And if you are not a religious person, you probably line up a little bit more with what we would call consequentialism. So what is that, you ask eagerly, forgetting that I can't hear you because this is just a video? Well, go to slide 11 and let's find out. So consequentialists, again, as it says in the slide, these are not the only two lenses through which you can think about morality. These are two really big, broad senses through which you can think about this. So consequentialists believe that the morality of an action is to be judged solely by its consequences. So if you are a consequentialist, you pretty much believe that the ends justify the means. Whatever action you take is good or bad based on what happens after it. Nothing is good or bad in and of itself. A deontologist, rather, believes that the morality of an action is based on a set of rules that must be followed, as opposed to the consequences of an action, as a consequentialist would believe. So the consequentialists say, okay, you did this. What was the outcome of that? Was the outcome of that good, or was the outcome of that bad? If the outcome of that was good, then congratulations, you have done something moral. If the outcome of that is bad, then you have done something that is immoral. A deontologist, rather, would look at that and say, okay, you did an action. Let me consult my list of rules about which actions are good and which actions are bad, and then we will decide on whether or not that was a moral action for you to take. Quick example. If I kill somebody, a deontologist might say, okay, the rule is don't kill people, so that was immoral of you to do. If you are a consequentialist, you'd say, well, wait, who'd you kill? Why did you do it? What was the outcome of that killing? Was it ultimately good or bad? And they would say, one or the other. I'm not here to tell you, what a religion would say about killing somebody or what have you, but that is kind of the basic, a very simple way to look at this. And we'll look at a few examples as we move forward. Basically, if you think about consequentialism and deontology, you are talking about intrinsic good and instrumental good, or intrinsic value and instrumental value. If something is intrinsically good, that means that it is good in and of itself. It is good for its own sake. It has nothing at all to do with whether or not it is good for something else. It is just good on its own. Instrumental value is the opposite of that. So that is something that is good because it achieves something else that is good. So if you think about something like eating healthy and exercising, is eating healthy and exercising intrinsically good? Is it just good to do that? Or are they just a means to an end? Are eating well and exercising only good because they help you look swole and fit? Or are they good in and of themselves? What about something else? What about something like education? This is a big argument that happens a lot and happens a lot in classrooms. Mr. Mathis, you cry, asking, begging, pleading. Why are we doing this? Why does this matter? And I answer, because it is good to learn. And that might be a satisfying answer for you or not. But people often talk about education and they wonder whether or not, when we learn things, is it just good that we have learned them? Or should it be good to get a job? Should it be good to help you with your career? Should it be good to serve society in some way? In that sense, should we even be, so let's say it's intrinsically good to learn. Then that means whatever you want to learn is good. So whether it's English or ceramics or art or garment making or history or math or science or insert any field, then it's good to learn it because learning itself is good. If it's instrumentally good, then we're talking about, well, what might it be good for? One lens, as I already discussed, is that it might be good for you to achieve a good career, make a lot of money, be able to join the workforce. Maybe it's good because it will help you get into college. Maybe it's good because you'll be able to serve society in some larger way. Maybe it's good because you will use it every single day of your life. Maybe it's good because insert reason, right? So a lot of times when people look at school specifically, they say, well, Mr. Mathis, why do I have to be in this class? Why do I have to learn about themes? Am I ever going to use this in my real life? Also, I hope so, is the answer. Please watch movies and read books and with your brain switched on also. But also, you might say, Mr. Mathis, I'm never going to use this. And I might say, yeah, maybe you won't. People don't say that as much about English as they do about like math. They'll learn calculus and say, when am I ever going to use this? And the answer is probably never. And I could make some argument about, well, this is helping you learn to think critically. It's helping you learn to think logically and deal with rules in an arbitrary system as math is. Math is, by which I mean, there are rules in math that don't seem to make any sense. They just work the way they work because they work. And that's that. So maybe it will help you learn a different language at some point because you can learn the rules. Maybe it will help you if you want to become a programmer at some point. Maybe it will help you nimbly run through the twisted layers of bureaucracy in order to get something done through a large corporation or through the government. I could make that argument, or I could just say, it's good to learn. It is good to learn. And so that is the difference between instrumental and intrinsic value. Something that is good in and of itself, something that is good for something else. I'm going to be honest with you. I feel like I might be rambling more this time, and for that I apologize, but I don't really know what to do about it. If you can lip read and you want to provide me or your classmates with the original transcript from my first video, please do so. Okay, so now we're going to move on to utilitarianism. Utilitarianism. It's a pretty long word and kind of weird to look at. So it was outlined by J.S. Mill, John Stuart Mill, in his book Utilitarianism in 1861. He was not the only person to ever talk about utilitarianism. He was influenced a lot by a guy named Jeremy Bentham. And Jeremy Bentham, he had a lot of crazy thoughts. One of his ideas was something called the Panopticon, which was the idea of a prison that had like a central tower in the middle that could look into this big circular prison, basically, and look into every single cell so that one person in the middle could watch every single other person. And then he argued also that you wouldn't even need the middle person. You could just let them go and the prisoners would police themselves. That's an aside that I just think is interesting. But J.S. Mill kind of followed in his wake, and he wrote Utilitarianism, which is broadly defined by what is called the happiness principle. The happiness principle. The happiness principle is basically that what the thing that is moral, the thing that is good, is whatever causes the most good for the most people. So a harder way to say it, a more complex way, is actions are considered moral when they promote utility and immoral when they promote the reverse. And utility here is defined as happiness with the absence of pain. So if something makes people happy without causing them pain, that is good. If it doesn't, then it's bad. Basically, when you look at an action, you define what its consequences are for most people. Does it contribute toward the most happiness for the most people, or does it not? For Mill, as we move on to slide 14, there are levels of happiness. Some things are just better because they are intrinsically better. So things aren't only instrumentally good here. There are like basically tiers of happiness here. So like S tier happiness, the highest tier that you could be is doing human things, learning, intellectual pursuits. Those are the best, good, most happiness, wonderful things. If you can really have a good game of chess, or you learn a really challenging concept, those are the best good that you can have. This is contrasted to like a physical pleasure. So he would say that eating a really good meal is not quite as good as struggling with a difficult text and understanding it. Now, he does have reasons as to why he thinks that these things are better. We're not going to get into them, but we just want to talk about how specifically Mill would argue this, because it's important to think about, why wouldn't then we just do things that feel good all the time? So eat really rich, delicious foods all the time, stop going to school, just kind of lay out in the sun and swim all day. Wouldn't that be better than if we ever had to get jobs or work or anything like that? And so we just want to make sure that we get past these very physical, animalistic pleasures into something that's a little bit more human. This indeed is why he argued that people would rather be slightly unhappy people than extremely happy animals. The level of pleasures that we are able to experience is higher than that of beasts. So you could think of it also like, things that you enjoyed when you were a little kid, now you might think that they're fine, but they're no longer great. They're no longer really, really good, and you really like them. And perhaps you have found that being home all the time and being able to watch as much TV, play as much video games, perhaps you have found, maybe not, that it sours over time and it becomes boring after time. And what you really want is that as like a seasoning on top of other things. And maybe you haven't found that, and that's totally fine. I'm not throwing a value judgment there. I'm just saying that perhaps Mill is on to something here. So because also these higher pleasures are better, these intellectual pleasures are better, it is better to be an unhappy philosopher than a happy fool, because if you are smarter, you can have more refined, more sophisticated, more good pleasures. Some questions that you might have here are definitely maybe cropping up in your head. So we move on to slide 15, and we see for the utilitarian, nearly all things are good insofar as they have instrumental value. Some things are intrinsically better. Great poetry is better than great food, but even those are only good because they maximize happiness. I ask you here, what do you think? Does that make sense? Do you agree or disagree? Can you think of any issues or problems with this as a view of morality? Or does it seem pretty straightforward to you? And I'll pause so that you have a chance to pause and think and ask a question before I kind of posit a few ideas of my own. So, utilitarianism might sound like it makes a lot of sense, for sure. One of the biggest issues with it is, how do you calculate happiness? How do you measure it? What does one unit of happiness look like? And is my happiness different than yours? Would I call what I say was one happiness unit, maybe that counts as 10 happiness units for you, or vice versa? How do we make an objective measurement for happiness or pleasure or utility, which is really the word that he wants to use? How do you know? So that's one thing. The second thing is, how do you calculate happiness against each other? So let's say I am me and you are all of you. If I've asked you to think of a lot of crazy things, but this might be the craziest. Is something that would make me unbelievably, outrageously, ridiculously happy worth more than something that would make all of you just like a little bit happy? So let's say This is purely for argument. I would be outrageously, unbelievably happy if somebody gave this class $1 million and I got to keep all of it. That would make me extremely happy. I'm guiltless and I have no empathy, apparently, so I don't care that you wouldn't get anything. I'm very, very happy to receive all of that money. Is that happiness? Does that outweigh your unhappiness there? Additionally, would knowing, like, if I knew that that could be an option and instead it was split out amongst all of us, would my unhappiness beat all of your slightly more happiness because you get to have some money? Do you see what I'm saying? So how do you calculate, a group's slight additional happiness compared to an individual's sadness or great happiness here? When we're thinking about voting, also, that kind of creates, if it's always the most good for the most people, you kind of lose the individual in that, right? So you can take it to a place where, let's say, I could torture one person, and for whatever reason, that would make a group of 1 million people, just like a little bit happy, like a tiny bit. But it added up, all of their little bit of happiness is worth more, ? Than the sadness of the one person to be tortured for the rest of his life. How does utilitarianism deal with something like that? That's an obviously ridiculous question on its face. It's an obviously ridiculous premise, but it highlights the ideas of measuring people's happiness against each other. So that's utilitarianism, and obviously it goes more toward consequentialism. Immanuel Kant has an ethical system that he created in his groundwork for the metaphysics of morals, in which he believes that the consequences of an action are not the important question. It does not matter what happens after you act. Instead, morality comes from a rational test of whether we would want everyone to do the thing we are discussing all of the time. So, the categorical imperative is what that is called. The categorical imperative means that you should act only on that maxim by which you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law. Act as though the maxim of your action were to become by your will a universal law of nature. Here's how everyone should act all the time. So you could approach a situation and say, all right, I am considering not telling the truth. Would this be good or would this be bad? A utilitarian might say, well, why are you lying? Are you lying to make your mom feel good? Because, she asked you, does she look really good in this outfit? And you're like, yeah, you look great. But she's like, she looks fine. She doesn't look bad. Like, you'd tell her if she looked bad, but she looks fine. And so whatever, it's a little white lie. Did you like the dinner that I cooked? Yeah, it's great. It's good. It's fine. It's a good dinner. Thank you. When really, it was a little salty or whatever. Are those lies okay? Because ultimately they save more in happiness than they cause. Or is it bad because it's a lie and truth is always the best thing? For Kant, I think he might say that, you wouldn't always want somebody to lie. In fact, you want people to tell the truth. So according to Kantian ethics, perhaps lies would always be wrong because they could never pass the categorical imperative. They could never pass the test of, would I want everyone to do this all the time, always? And that's a tough question that would only give you a few things that you're actually able to do. For Kant, you cannot call an action moral, as I've said, unless you would will that everybody does it. That rule on its own has intrinsic value in and of itself and does not need to be of instrumental value to anything else. It doesn't have to be good to achieve a different goal. It doesn't have to be good to do something else. It is just good to follow the rule. What do you think? Does that make sense? Do you agree or disagree? Can you think of any issues or problems with this as a view of morality? And I'll pause here to give you a chance to think about that, because you're definitely going to pause. I see you pausing. You wouldn't lie to me. That would be unethical. So perhaps you've already been able to see some possible issues with this as a moral guide. And I think that my lying example is kind of a good one, right? If lying is always wrong and you should always tell the truth, what happens when you're standing on the street and you see, a young child running away from you at full speed, obviously terrified, and then running closely behind him with, you see a man with a gun, and he says, "Did you see a child run past here?" Is it moral to tell him or not to tell him? How do you weigh that? If lying is always wrong, if that's, the rule, then wouldn't I have to tell the truth? But if I tell the truth, aren't I then leading to this child's death, ultimately? Wouldn't that be on my hands in some way? And this transfers to Batman pretty well, actually. And you didn't think that I was going to go there, but the ethical system that Batman follows is, if you did not know, he doesn't kill people. He does not kill them. And he takes very much pride in that. Ignore all the people who probably are dead because of his actions throughout the movies. He never purposefully would choose to kill somebody. And the movie revolves a lot around that rule that Batman has. But the question is, wouldn't he actually do a lot more if, instead of constantly, because these criminals that he puts away are always getting out. They're always escaping again. They're always getting out of Arkham Asylum. And so wouldn't it be better to kill them and stop them from wreaking havoc on Gotham City over and over and over and over again? Wouldn't that be better? Because they wouldn't commit as many crimes and hurt as many people. Perhaps, though, for Kant, just killing somebody extrajudicially is bad. You should not do that because you don't just want people to be allowed to kill whenever. And he is still making the moral action because he can't control what they do, right? He can't control that they're going to commit crimes. He is just going to do good for himself and not try to look down the line, because who knows? What if the Joker changes, right? What if the Joker decides to be a good guy? Wouldn't it be unethical to kill him then, is the question. All right, we've got a couple scenarios coming up here, and I'm just going to ask you to look at the first two. We've got some more that you can look at as well, and we're also going to talk about the trolley problem, which is a classic one that you're probably familiar with, but I just want you to think about some of these, so I'm going to go through them really quickly. Okay, so for Kant, these are from his Groundworks for the Metaphysics of Morality. Scenario 1. A man feels sick of life as the result of a mounting series of misfortunes that has reduced him to hopelessness, but he still possesses enough of his reason to ask himself whether it would be moral to take his own life. So this guy hates life. He wants to commit suicide. Is that moral or is that immoral? What would Kant say? Would Kant say, yes, this is a moral act? Does this pass the test of the categorical imperative or not? What would Mill say? Is he allowed to take his own life if you consider the utility of actions? What do you think? Do you think that it is moral to take your own life? Why? What do you think? Think about that. The next scenario. A man finds himself driven by the need to borrow money. He knows very well that he will not be able to pay it back, but he also knows that nobody will lend him anything unless he firmly promises to pay it back within a fixed period of time. He wants to make such a promise, but he still has enough conscience to ask himself, is this right? Is this the right thing to do? So if a man desperately needs money, he will die or starve or lose his home, and he knows he'll never be able to pay it back. Is it okay to lie in that case and say that I'm going to pay it back, knowing that I don't plan on doing it? Is that right? Would Mill think so? Does Kant think so? Do you think so? Think about it. What would you say to that man if he asked you your advice? And the next two are after that welcome back slide. A man finds himself with a talent that, with a certain amount of cultivation, could make him a useful man for all sorts of purposes, but he sees himself in comfortable circumstances and prefers to give himself up to pleasure rather than bother about increasing and improving his fortunate natural aptitudes. Yet he asks himself, is this moral? So you are perhaps in a place like that as well. You find yourself in a position where maybe you could be a really good doctor. Maybe you could be a really good nurse. Maybe you could be a really good social worker. And if you worked on those things, you could make yourself, more useful for others, create more happiness for others. But he's happy enough. He's fine. Where he is, he doesn't mind being in the place that he's in. My friend was in this situation for a while. He graduated from college and then became a bug exterminator. Nothing against bug exterminating, but he had a degree in economics and philosophy, and he decided to become a bug exterminator. And we just kept talking to him saying, what are you doing? Like, why are you doing this? And his answer was always, because it's easy. It's fine. Like, I'm fine with this. I'm making enough money to be happy and comfortable, and it gives me time to do what I want to do. I don't have to work or stress about anything too much. I just get to do this, and then I move on. Is that moral or not? And finally, a man who is himself flourishing but sees others who have to struggle with great hardships and whom he could easily help, thinks to himself, what do I care? Let everyone be as happy as heaven intends or as he can make himself. I won't deprive him of anything. I won't even envy him, but I don't feel like contributing anything to his well-being or helping him in his distress. Is this moral? According to Kant, according to Mill, according to you. So he knows that he could help others, but is it okay to choose not to help others when you have the ability to help them, or is that immoral? What would Kant and Mill say about that? What do you say about that? Okay, the trolley problem. You might be familiar with it. I will rehash it out here so that you have a better idea of what the trolley problem actually is, and it goes like this. So there is a trolley speeding on some tracks, and it is already moving on its own. You have not done anything to it, but you find yourself at a crossroads where the tracks switch, and you could pull a lever, taking an action which would cause the trolley to move off of the track it is currently on, where it will kill 5 people. If you decide to pull the lever, it will only kill 1 person. What do you do? And that's the real question, right? What is the more moral action in this position? What do you do? Do you stand there and not do anything and let 5 people be killed? Or do you take an action and cause 1 person to die? Is your inaction the same as letting those 5 people die? Or because you had nothing to do with the trolley's movement in the first place, you are free and clear. You are hands clean. Does it change if you learn more about those people? Let's say it's 5 very old people and 1 child. Does that make a difference? Let's say that it is 5 criminals and 1 innocent person. Let's say it's 5 innocent people and 1 criminal, right? You can have endless variations on this, but the basic question is, what is the more moral action? Do you pull the lever and therefore by your action directly cause 1 person to die, or do you let the trolley take its course and through your inaction allow those 5 people to die? What is the moral thing to do? And that is, my friends, the true question. Okay, so that's our notes again. It actually ended up being about exactly the same length as the first video that I made. If this didn't record audio, then I guess I'll record it again, but that would be bad, I guess would be my argument. Hopefully you guys enjoy this. Hopefully you enjoy The Dark Knight. I look forward to talking to you about this. Sorry that it wasn't up. I don't know what happened, but it will be up very soon. And thank you to the student who told me about it. I was going to name them, but I didn't know if they actually would want that. So thank you very much, guys. Hopefully you enjoy this. Hopefully your brain isn't hurting too bad. And hopefully you're enjoying, thinking about your basic assumptions about the world. Thank you very much. And happy end of the year. Bye.